If you are visiting Italy for the first time this year, make sure you watch this video because in it, I'll be sharing all my best tips and tricks for first-timers. Hi, I'm Christina from happytowander.com, and Italy is honestly one of my favorite countries in the world. And after visiting over a dozen times in the past decade, I can honestly say I've learned a lot about all the things that you should do there and also all the things that you shouldn't do there. So in this video, I'm going to be sharing all my best tips and tricks specifically geared towards first-timers. So let's start with some Italy travel planning tips. So tip number one is to definitely expand your Italy itinerary beyond just the most famous must-sees. With 20 different regions, there are so many amazing places in Italy to visit, and I promise some of them are places that you haven't even heard of. Social and popular media over the years have made certain destinations kind of the top of everyone and their mom's bucket list. So places like Rome, Florence, Venice, Pisa, Cinque Terre, all of those are really famous destinations that everybody's flocking to. But the truth is there's a ton of really cool places in and around those regions that you should also be exploring. So what I would suggest you do is pick some of these famous places and then also add on some day trips or side trips to areas nearby so that you have a mix of both hidden gems and famous attractions. Now, in terms of when to visit, I would say try your best to avoid visiting in the thick of summer, meaning from July to August. And the reason I say that is not just because everybody is trying to visit Italy in that time, so the prices are really high, there's lots of crowds. Also, in many cases, it can get unbearably hot as well. So I would say try your best to time your visit for maybe the off-season or shoulder season. Spring and fall are both amazing times to be visiting Italy. And also, some Italian cities are just incredible to visit in the winter, just because there's a fraction of the crowds and you can kind of actually feel like you enjoy the city and have it to yourself, which is very rare and would honestly never happen if you went in the summer. All right, so now let's move on to Italy travel tips for transport and getting around. So first things first, I would say try to go with public transport as much as possible. You don't necessarily need to rent a car unless you're planning on visiting a lot of smaller villages or more remote natural areas. To be honest, if you're just going from city to city, odds are you can just do that with trains and buses, and it'll save you a lot of stress because driving in Italy is very, very stressful and it's not for the faint of heart. If you do end up renting a car though, there are a few must-knows. So first off, be sure to rent a really small car, the smallest car you possibly can, just because in a lot of these smaller villages, their roads are really narrow and you don't want to get stuck. Trust me, it happens. Also be sure to get something called a vignette if you're driving into some neighboring countries. So for example, if you're driving in Austria or Switzerland, you need to buy a vignette, which is a special sticker that you stick on your car that gives you the right to use motorways in those countries. Another thing to keep in mind is you should be avoiding, I don't want to butcher the pronunciation, so this, and these are basically zones in busy cities where you can get fined for driving because they limit the amount of vehicles or the times that you can drive through those zones. Now, if you plan on going by public transport, a few important things that you should know include, first of all, when you're traveling by bus, a lot of the time in Italy, they don't actually sell tickets on the bus, so you have to make sure that you have tickets before you get on. And usually where you can go buy that is the tobacco shop, or sometimes newspaper stands will also have them. Usually you can also use those tickets for the metro as well. So if there's ever any kind of deal where you can get a packet of multiple for a discount, be sure to get one of those because you'll probably get through them. Another thing is you should always be making sure to buy your train tickets in advance as well. Honestly, Italian train stations are one of the most chaotic places in the universe. So I would advise to not go to the station and buy your ticket. Try to buy it in advance so that you at least have eliminated that one stressor. And so you have your ticket ready once you get there. On that note, once you get to the station, oftentimes you'll find that the platform hasn't actually been announced yet. And that's because in larger cities, sometimes they won't actually know the train platform that you'll be on until the train arrives. So you'll often see a lot of people kind of standing in the main concourse area looking up at the signs, and that's because they're just waiting for the platform to be announced. So don't be stressed out if you get to the station and they haven't announced your platform yet. Everyone else is also in the same boat. So just wait for the number to come up and then run with everyone else. Something else to keep in mind though before you board the train is if you have a ticket, especially if it's like a physical ticket, you need to make sure you validate that ticket as well before you get on the train. Having a ticket isn't enough. You also have to make sure it's properly validated. Now with digital tickets, it's a lot easier. You don't have to worry about that. But if you have a physical ticket, make sure you get it stamped if there's a machine for you to stamp it, just because if a ticket controller comes by and the ticket's not validated, they don't actually consider it to be a valid ticket, so you can still get fined even if you've paid for it. Now let's cover some culture and etiquette tips for Italy. First off, try to remember that there's tremendous cultural diversity within Italy. Italy can look very different depending on where you're going. And in fact, if you're looking at northern and southern, in many ways, they are totally worlds apart. So just keep in mind that there's a ton of regional diversity and try to forget any stereotypes of the country that you might have seen in popular media. Another important thing is to learn how to say hello and thank you. Luckily, Italian is a very pretty language, and honestly, you've probably heard hello and thank you in the past. So to say good morning is buongiorno, which I'm sure you've heard before. And in the evening, if you're saying hello, it's buonasera. Of course, course, to say thank you, a very simple grazie will suffice. Another important etiquette tip is to remember to cover up when you're visiting churches. Not only is this just more polite, a lot of churches will actually actively turn you away if you don't have your shoulders and your knees covered. So if you're visiting in the summer, just make sure you have a scarf with you so that you can drape it over your shoulders, and also have at least one skirt or one pair of pants that extends past your knee. Another thing to note is you should not be tipping by North American standards when you're in Italy. Oftentimes in restaurants, there's already a service and cover charge included in the bill. And even if you are to tip, most of the time it's going to be less than 10%. It's not going to be as extravagant as you would tip in North America, and they definitely don't expect it, so don't feel obligated. That said, you should definitely prepare for slower service than you're used to. Servers in Italy tend to take their time, and it's a really nice thing in my opinion. They're just not trying to rush you, not bother you, and kind of let you enjoy your evening, which I think is really great. But if you're waiting for them to bring you the bill, that bill is never going to come, so make sure you're the one that asks the server for the bill if you're wanting to make a move. Now let's move on to some Italy tips for attractions. So first things first, prepare yourself for scaffolding and restorations. Now, Italy is an incredible country, but on the other side of it being super historic, it's also really old, and a lot of the monuments in Italy require active restoration. So don't be surprised if there's a place or a specific attraction that you've been wanting to see forever and you show up and it's just covered in scaffolding or closed for some reason because of restoration works. This is super common. It happens on every trip, and there's not really anything you can do about it, but just have that expectation in mind and don't cry like I did when I went to the Trevi Fountain and it looked like this. Another tip is to wake up at sunrise to see the most popular attractions. Of course, this is more of a tip for peak season, but honestly, when you're visiting some super busy tourist destinations in Italy, the only time you're ever going to see it without a million people is if you wake up for sunrise. And I know that sounds unbearable, but trust me, it is worth every second of missed sleep, because then you can feel like the city is yours and you're really getting a chance to appreciate it without all the people. Another tip is to make sure you book tickets in advance for popular attractions. Now, not only is this going to save you time so that you don't have to go line up for tickets on the day of, sometimes in peak season, the most popular attractions can actually sell out, and you don't want to be that person that everyone in the group is mad at because you didn't book tickets in advance. Now, another sneaky trick that I have for avoiding crowds in Italy is showing up to an attraction just before it closes. This is a trick that I've personally used at the Vatican museums, and I actually got to have the place pretty much to myself just by showing up an hour before it closed. Granted, an hour is not a ton of time, so I did kind of speed through it, but oftentimes if you show up just before it closes, there will be way fewer crowds than even if you showed up first thing in the morning, because everyone thinks to show up first thing in the morning. But now you know, if you go just before they close, oftentimes the crowds will already be gone by then too. Depending on where you're going, you should also be sure to look into sunrise or after hours tours as well. In a lot of the more touristy cities in Italy, like Rome for instance, they're starting to do things like sunrise and after hours tours, which allows you to visit certain attractions before they open to the public or after they're closed to the public. Of course, this often comes at an extra cost, but it is a very special experience to splurge on, and definitely one that I'd recommend. A few years ago, I did a sunrise tour around Venice, and it was honestly just the most incredible thing. Being able to see all the piazzas without a million people in them was worth every penny. Lastly, if you plan to do a lot of paid attractions during your visit, be sure to look into whether or not your city offers a city sightseeing card or an attractions pass or anything like that. Usually with these cards, you'll pay one set price and then you'll get access to most of the tourist attractions in a city, and I think that's a really great way to save money if you're planning on visiting a bunch of these attractions. I used one of these in Verona and it saved me so much money, and it was just really nice to be able to use one pass and get into a bunch of places, and it really helped me seek out more hidden gems for sure. Now let's move on to tips for when you arrive to Italy. So the first is to beware of pickpockets. I do have a full video about how to avoid pickpockets in Europe if you want to learn more about the common scams and techniques, but you should really just know that pickpocketing is a very common occurrence in Italy, especially in touristy cities, because let's face it, where there's a lot of tourists, there's a lot of wallets to be taken and a lot of easy targets. I was actually pickpocketed in Rome during my first backpacking trip, so I know how it feels. So just be extra vigilant when you're in super crowded places like train stations or tourist attractions. Besides just being a little bit more aware, you should also take care to learn about some of the common scams that you'll find in Italy. So some really big ones include the friendship bracelets. There's often in touristy areas, like in the main square in Milan, for instance, there's guys who are there with friendship bracelets and they'll try to lure you over and tie it on your wrist and then demand that you pay for it. If you see these guys or they offer you a friendship bracelet, even if they say it's free, be sure to walk away and get away as soon as possible, because sometimes they can be quite forceful. On a similar note, oftentimes you'll find people in main squares giving away roses and they'll say it's free, they'll say it's a welcome gift, but then they'll turn back around and ask you for a donation. Or it's really funny, sometimes they'll give a free rose to the lady in a couple and then come back and ask the man to pay for it, which is very fun to observe. Now, honestly, apart from that kind of petty theft, you don't have to worry too much safety-wise when you're in Italy. It's really just those opportunistic crimes that you have to look out for. I've never felt in danger in terms of violent crime when I'm in Italy, so just keep those scams in mind and you'll be fine. Now, another thing to not be weirded out by is oftentimes when you check into a hotel or an accommodation, they will take your passport and make a copy of it. Don't worry, this isn't a scam. This is just a legal obligation that they have to fulfill. So if they take your passport passport, don't worry, you will get it back and they're not trying to steal it. Similarly, you'll often be asked to pay a tourist tax when you arrive. This can range from €3 to €5 per night per person, depending on where you're staying. Again, this is not a scam. This is another legal obligation that the accommodation has to fulfill. And usually it does have to be paid in person, which is why it's not included in the price that you pay up front if you're booking online. Now, another tip is that when you get to Italy, you should be getting some cash out. So not only is this good for smaller purchases like gelato, you should also make sure you have cash because a lot of public restrooms in Italy these days actually require you to pay. So this is a really small fee. Usually it's like 50 cents or €1, but it's still good to have coins just in case for when these emergencies pop up. Otherwise, just make sure you do your business before you leave a museum or a restaurant so that you don't get caught out in emergency situations, because public bathrooms in Italy I found are not as common as you might think. Now, another random bathroom tip is to not be alarmed if you can't find the flush in the washroom. Obviously, this depends on where you are, but from my own personal experience, I've noticed sometimes the flush is the standard button on the wall, sometimes it's a little pulley thing, sometimes it's a circular button just detached from the toilet altogether on the other side of the wall, sometimes it's a pedal on the floor. It's very inconsistent, but before you panic, just be sure to look around and see if there's anything that's pressable, and odds are that's gonna be the flush. All right, now that we've spoken in depth about toilets, it's time to talk about food and drink tips for Italy, because obviously we're talking about Italy, so we do need a special section just for the food and drink. Now, the first tip is to make sure you go to restaurants that have Italian menus. If a restaurant that you're going to has their menu in English, odds are they're catering more to tourists than to locals, and that's already a red flag right there. Another red flag is if there's a guy out front trying to lure you to come into the restaurant, that's probably not a good sign. And the final nail in the coffin is if there are photos on the menu, be sure to run, because that's likely a sign that it's not an authentic restaurant and they're probably going to serve you mediocre food for inflated prices. Another rule of thumb is to try to dine away from tourist attractions. I mean, this isn't always true, but for the most part, if you're in a really busy touristy place and you see a restaurant there that has an incredible view or anything that says like, oh, we've got free Wi-Fi or tourist menus, odds are they're also catering to tourists, so it's not necessarily going to be the most amazing food that you've ever had in your life. If you just walk a few blocks away from the main tourist attractions, you'll tend to find way better restaurants for way better value, so definitely keep that in mind. Another important food tip is to order based on the regional specialties of wherever you are. We as North Americans have a certain vision of what Italian food is. We think it's just pizza and pasta, but the truth is there's a lot of regional diversity in Italy, so depending on where you are, there's different regional specialties. So before you order pizza and pasta everywhere you go, try to look into if that area has any special regional dishes that you should try. On a similar note, don't go to Italy expecting to find Americanized Italian classics on the menu. So what I realized the hard way was actually a lot of the dishes that we grow up in North America thinking are Italian aren't actually a thing over there. So things like spaghetti and meatballs are not an authentic Italian dish. Chicken fettuccine alfredo, not a thing either. Garlic bread, also not really a thing. So when you're over there, don't look for those on the menu. And if you see them on the menu, then run, because it's obviously a sign that they're catering to tourists more than to locals. Now, another important thing is to kind of understand the structure of an Italian menu, because I think for first-time visitors, it can be a little bit confusing. So when you see the word menu in Italy, actually this often refers to a set meal. So when you see the word menu and it gives a price, basically that's saying, oh, this is a 3-course meal combo and it'll cost this much. Now, when you're looking at the actual physical menu with a list of dishes, usually it's separated into a few different categories. So the first page will usually be antipasto. So these are appetizers like cured meats, cheeses, etc., something that you have before the main meal to kind of whet your appetite. And then there's the primi course, which is the first course, and this will usually be something carby like risotto or pasta. And then there's the secondi, which is usually a meat-based dish. And then there's the contorni, which are side dishes like roasted vegetables. And finally, dolci, obviously it's desserts. Now, if you're trying to have an indulgent 4-course meal, you would follow things in that order. But practically speaking, it's completely normal to just have a primi and not a secondi. You don't have to feel pressured to have a 4-course meal every time. Now, another important thing is to not expect all-day service at restaurants. In North America, we're very used to when a restaurant is open, they will stay open for the entire day. But actually in Italy, it's very common for restaurants to close up shop between lunchtime and dinner time so that they have some time to rest and also prep for dinner. In bigger cities, you will probably not have trouble finding at least one place that's open, but a lot of restaurants will not stay open continuously during that time. Another important thing is to make reservations if you can. If you have your heart set on a specific restaurant, then it's definitely a must, especially if it's a popular place, because they don't usually reserve that many spots for walk-ins. Another thing to take note of is the fact that prices can actually be higher if you are sitting down to have it, as opposed to if you're taking it away or if you're having it at the bar. So if there's 2 columns with different prices, you'll know that one price is for if you're standing at the bar and one price is for if you're sitting down. On that note, you should definitely make sure to familiarize yourself with Italian coffee culture as well before you go, because I feel like Italian cafe culture is so interesting and it's also very different to what we're used to. So first things first, as I mentioned before, most people will actually drink their coffee at the bar and it'll be a very quick activity. They'll order one one cafe, which is an espresso shot, slurp it down, and then leave. And getting a takeaway coffee in a cup to slurp throughout the day is not really a common thing over there. So yeah, it's very much like a quick walk-in, slurp your espresso, and get out kind of affair. On that note, cappuccinos are more or less considered a breakfast drink over there. So you'll tend to have it in the morning and not really after lunch. And this is kind of considered a faux pas in a lot of cases. A lot of people don't like to get cappuccinos after 11 a.m., especially not after a heavy meal, because they think the milk kind of curdles in your stomach. And no one's gonna stop you, but it's just not really commonly done. Another thing to keep in mind is that lattes don't really exist in Italy. So if you order a latte, you will literally get a cup of milk, because that's what latte means in Italian. If you're looking for coffee with milk, you get a cafe macchiato, but it's not going to be the same sort of latte that you would typically get from Starbucks or anything like that. Now, if you're feeling really jittery from all that caffeine and you feel like you need to hydrate yourself, a really good thing is that there's a lot of free water fountains scattered around Italian cities. So if you bring a reusable water bottle, you can easily fill up in public places for free and you don't have to pay for water. That said, if you're at a restaurant, water is very rarely free. So if you sit down and the server asks you, oh, do you want water? Just know that that water is going to cost you. Luckily, it's not really that high of a cost. Usually a bottle of water will cost you between 2 to 3 euros for a big bottle. Just know that asking for tap water is not really common. And in some cases, they might actually think it's kind of rude. So just keep that in mind. And be sure to specify if you want still or sparkling as well. Another thing you need to try when you're in Italy is something called aperitivo. So this is usually a pre-dinner ritual where you grab a drink, like an Aperol Spritz or something, and a few nibbles. And this is just kind of a way to whet your appetite in advance of dinner. It's a really lovely tradition. It's kind of like an Italian happy hour. And depending on where you go, in a lot of places, they'll give you free snacks when you buy a drink, or if you're really lucky and you seek out specific places, they'll even have a full buffet spread when you buy a drink, which is really great. And last but not least, it's very, very important, but when you're looking for gelato, be sure to avoid places that look like this, which have really colorful gelato that stacks super high with a bunch of decorations. Usually this is a sign that it's not high quality gelato, just because, you know, there's a lot of artificial coloring, and when it's stacked that high, it means that it's not super fresh, and it's also probably not being kept at the right temperature. In contrast, if you're looking for high quality gelato, what you should be looking for are these metal tins, usually with a lid, because that shows that they're keeping the temperature under control. And in terms of color, you should be looking for things that have a really natural color. So things that are quite pale and not at all like the radioactive colors that you can often see in super touristy areas. All right, I hope this list of Italy travel tips was helpful. If you like travel videos that are practical, just like this one, be sure to like and subscribe. And of course, as usual, be sure to leave a comment if you have any more questions. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye.